All right, I think it looks like we are about ready to start. I welcome you all again to our November 1st Mondays with our very special guest, Dr. Cyril Wecht. Oh, hello, everyone. And now I welcome our introducer to Dr. Wecht, Susie Bulk-Selitz.
Thank you, Bernice. Just 1 minute.
And Susie, of course, is our former president of Bethel. And we are delighted that she could be here today to do these special honors.
Okay, I think are we good now? Is there an echo or is it?
You sound great. You sound great.
Okay,
and I just want to remind everyone that after your introduction and after the program, we will be raffling off a copy of Dr. Wecht's book. So stay tuned. I do have to say, winner must be present.
Okay.
So please stick around to see who wins the book. All right, Susie, thank you.
Okay, Cyril H. Wecht is a medical legal consultant and forensic pathologist, author, and lecturer who served the people of Allegheny County as their elected coroner for 20 years. He has performed approximately 21,000 autopsies and reviewed or been consulted on approximately 42,000 additional post-mortem examinations, including cases in several foreign countries. Dr. Wecht holds various faculty positions at the University of Pittsburgh, Duquesne University, and Carlow University, and serves as the chairman of the advisory board of the Cyril H. Wecht Institute of Forensic Science and Law. He is the author or co-author of more than 650 professional publications and editor or co-editor of 48 books, as well as co-author of the popular nonfiction books, Cause of Death, Grave Secrets, Who Killed John Benet Ramsey, Mortal Evidence, Tales from the Morgue, Crime Scene to Courtroom, and Final Exams. He has served as president of the American College of Legal Medicine and the American Academy of Forensic Science. Dr. Wecht is certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology, and is a fellow of the College of American Pathologists, the American Society of Clinical Pathologists, and the National Association of Medical Examiners. Dr. Wecht most recently spoke at First Mondays in April of 2021, discussing his autobiography, The Life and Deaths of Dr. Cyril Wecht, Memoirs of America's Most Controversial Forensic Pathologist. Today, he will discuss, and as Bernice said, we will raffle off a copy of his most recent book, The JFK Assassination Dissected. Welcome, Dr. Wecht.
Thank you very much for that very gracious introduction. I want to thank Ms. Nettleson and the members of her committee for inviting me. A pleasure to be with you. And a special hello to all of my extended Machatunim, the wonderful Balk family, who are strong supporters of your synagogue, and whose son, grandson, cousin, whatever, Harold, is my wonderful son-in-law. I like that he's my favorite son-in-law. He's the only son-in-law. Well, let's talk about the JFK assassination. Let me take you back. It's now November 1963. It's Thursday, November 22nd. Kennedy flies into Dallas. It's a re-election campaign for the 64 campaign. Despite many admonitions for him not to go because of the ugly situation that existed there. He realized that it was important politically to do so. Adlai Stevenson, twice Democratic nominee for president, and our ambassador to the United Nations, have been physically jostled and spat upon in Dallas just a couple of weeks before. The largest downtown newspaper in Dallas received and published a full-page ad with a black rim border, suggestive of nothing less than a large obituary notice. Handbills, tens of thousands, showing Kennedy's picture and saying "wanted for treason" were distributed in the streets of Dallas prior to his arrival. And what really tells you how extensive was this campaign of hatred was the fact, and we don't know to what extent it wasn't being monitored, but we have documented, reported cases from throughout schools in the South of young school children bursting out into applause when it was announced that the president of their country had been killed. Think about that. Thousands and thousands of young kids being in that way indoctrinated to that extent of applauding the killing of their president. So on Thursday night, then Thursday, early Friday morning, November 22nd, they flew into the field there from Fort Worth into Dallas, and the motorcade began. So the limousine in which Kennedy was riding was a big open four-door car. He was sitting in the rear, his wife to his left, and directly in front of him were Governor John Connally, then governor of Texas, and at that time a Democrat, later to turn Republican and run for president himself. And to his left, in front of Mrs. Kennedy, was his wife, Nellie Connally. So the motorcade began, car in front, cars in back, motorcyclists in front and in back, and proceeded into downtown Dallas. Actually, it was turning out to be what appeared to be a wonderful day. The sun was shining, the crowds were cheering, the flags were flying, and the crowd was ebullient, excited about Jackie Kennedy and her resplendent two-piece pink suit, and everybody was delighted. The last words that John Kennedy ever heard, ever spoken to him directly by Nellie Connally, who turned diagonally to her right, looked back at the president and said, "Mr. President, you can't say that the people of Dallas don't love you." It was now 12:30 Central Time, 1:30 our time here, Eastern Standard Time. And the cars moved down Main Street. They could have gone straight ahead and moved into Stemmons Freeway, which is much like our Parkway, fast speed road that circumscribes the city. But they were getting such a good response that they decided they would prolong it a little bit. The cars came down Main Street, turned right onto Houston Street, and went a short block on Houston, and then an acute turn backward to the left and downward somewhat onto Elm Street. And that's when the shooting began. Kennedy is shot, his hands moved up toward his mouth and throat in this fashion. Then Governor John Connally, seated 30 inches away from his back to Kennedy's chest, is struck, and then Kennedy is hit in the head by shots that shatter his brain, spewing blood, brain, bone, tissue backward and to the left, landing onto a motorcycle policeman riding off the left rear wheel to such an extent that that policeman was certain that he had been shot. It took him a half a minute to realize that he had not been shot. The cars then sped quickly to Parkland Memorial Hospital, a short distance away, which is a large trauma center there in Dallas. Some 18 physicians were there, many already waiting, others quickly assembled, and everybody worked on the president feverishly and in their various expert fashions. And finally, about a half an hour later, around 1 o'clock, Dr. Kemp Clark, head of neurosurgery at Parkland, examined the president and said, "Mr. President," he said to the people there, "there's nothing that we can do for this man," and he was declared dead. What did they see there at Parkland Hospital? They saw a wound here in the anterior midline of the neck at the level of the knot of the tie. They quickly ascertained that that bullet had ripped through the trachea, the windpipe. And so they did what you do in cases of brain injury. You perform a tracheostomy. In this case, the bullet had performed the tracheostomy for them. The opening, however, was a little too big, a little too small to attach the cuff. And so they had to expand upon it and to insert the tracheostomy tube. Then they saw a big gaping defect on the head, which all those physicians there and nurses described as being posterior on the right side. And they talked about exposed cerebellum, which is that part of the brain located in the rear and inferiorly controls coordination and balance. That's what they described there, all those doctors. Good old Texas boys who had no dog in that race, as that famous line is from JFK's movie. That's what they saw. So the next prominent event was the medical examiner coming there to assume control of the body. It was his jurisdiction. That medical examiner was a board certified forensic pathologist. I knew him personally. We had met when we were in the Air Force at different bases attending a conference in forensic pathology in DC. He was, however, physically pushed aside. And when he persisted in claiming jurisdiction, he was pushed up against the wall firmly by FBI Secret Service people and hands on guns. And they told him to just cease and desist. They took the president's body in violation of the laws of Dallas and Texas out to Love Airfield, where he was sworn in, where the president's body was placed in the back of the plane. Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as president, Jackie Kennedy in her bloodstained pink suit standing next to him. The flight then took off for Washington, D.C. They had not yet made a decision what they were going to do. And somewhere along the line, it was decided that they had to do an autopsy and that it would be performed at Bethesda Naval Station because of Kennedy's naval history. And so they went there, and this is the amazing thing that people don't know, don't think of. I want you to listen to this carefully. This is the President of the United States of America, who has been shot and killed in broad daylight in the fourth largest city of the country. He has multiple gunshot wounds, and you have to determine the angle, the range, the trajectory, the sequence of all those shots. And you have to then correlate those wounds in him with the wounds in Connally, who had sustained multiple gunshot wounds too. That is a formidable task requiring the expertise of a couple of forensic pathologists working together. So who did they call upon? Remember, this is our president to do this formidable undertaking. Two naval pathologists, Humes and Boswell by name, who had never done a medical legal autopsy, a gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers, had never done a gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers. This is our country. This is America. Well, what did these comedians see and do? They took off a corset-like garment that President Kennedy wore because of his back injury, and they identified a bullet wound that had not been seen in Dallas because they did not undress him there. That wound was about 5.5, 6 inches below the shoulder level on the right side. They then saw a defect on the head, which they placed a little bit more forward than had been seen by and noted by the doctors in Dallas. So that's what they saw. And they probed that wound in the back with their fingers, felt nothing, with an instrument, felt nothing, took x-ray, saw nothing, did the autopsy and found nothing. They were stuck, and just then information came in that a bullet had been found beneath the stretcher by the emergency room back in Dallas at Parkland Hospital, when a maintenance man trying to get to the men's room found the corridor blocked, bent down, moved the stretcher, and lo and behold, there was a bullet, a very conveniently located bullet. And that information was given to the Humes Boswell team, and they concluded that as the president lay on his back with pressure applied to the front of his chest for cardiac resuscitation, that pressure applied to the front of his chest pushed a bullet back out through several inches of soft tissue and then fell from his clothing onto the stretcher. That's absurd. When tissue is damaged by a bullet, it bleeds, it swells, it encompasses and entraps the bullet. The bullets do not move freely, but that was their conclusion. And they concluded that a bullet had struck the president in the head, fired from the front, and had exited, and that was it. So they gave that information and that report to President Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, and that was the end of it. And so they thought. But the next morning, when they finally got to talk to the principal surgeon who had worked on the president, they learned to their dismay that they had missed a gunshot wound in the president. They did not recognize the hole in his neck as a gunshot wound. They had stupidly failed to talk with any of the doctors in Dallas, which they should have done before commencing the autopsy. And they thought they were dealing with a tracheostomy. Well, it was a tracheostomy superimposed upon a bullet hole. Now they had to revise things. And now this was the birth of what came to be known later as a single bullet theory. First, they said that the bullet that entered Kennedy's back moved upward 11.5 degrees and exited from the front of his neck. That's how they tied in those two wounds. How did they deal with the fact that the bullet moved upward 11.5 degrees, having been fired, according to them, by Lee Harvey Oswald from the 6th floor window of the southeast corner of the the Dallas Public Safety Building, the Dallas School Depository Building. They said, well, what if the president had bent over, tying his shoelace, scratching his groin, whatever, that would have given that upward trajectory. Amazing, amazing. And that seemed to put everything to rest. And that was the end of it until they were confronted with a major problem. Abraham Zapruder, a women's clothing merchant in Dallas, this elderly gentleman in his 70s bought a Bell Howe 8mm camera. You'll remember, those of you who are over 50, possibly over 40, when you were in school, in high school and college, and your teacher wanted to show you a film, or you bought a film, you bought a spool of film in a little metal box, and then you took out the film and you fitted it on to the metal sprongs, and in serpentine fashion, then the film moves. It was determined by the FBI and the Bell Howe people that 18.3 frames of that film strip moved through the camera per second. And then they decided that they had to test fire the alleged murder weapon. This was a Mannlicher Carcano, a non-automatic bolt-action weapon considered by every long gun expert of the most inferior weapon of its genre developed anywhere in the world. Developed by Italy, where it is a standing joke, and where in Italy it is referred to as an instrument of love, not a weapon of war. That is what the Mannlicher Carcano is considered to be. And now then they went back and they studied it and they saw, and this is incontrovertible, that the time from when Kennedy is hit the first time until Connally is hit is 1.5 seconds. 1.5 seconds. They got the best marksman they could find, and it was determined that it took 2.3 seconds from shot to shot. In that, to work it, get rid of the used bullet, put in a new one, and without allowing time for re-aiming and repositioning at a moving target, that it took 2.3 seconds. That was impossible. So what they did was they now hooked up all the wounds. They said that the bullet that went into Kennedy's back and exited from the front of his neck, moving forward, leftward, and downward in midair, turned, came back to the left, to the right, 18-20 inches, struck Connally behind his right armpit, went into his chest, perforated the right lung, destroyed 4 inches of the right fifth rib, exited below nipple level. And there's John Connally. You see them on the Zapruder film with a Stetson hat here at shoulder level, looking at the crowd and enjoying their adulation. The bullet exited below nipple level, comes back up and around, hooks in to the back of Connally's wrist, shatters the distal end of the radius, one of the 2 long bones from the elbow to the wrist, exited from the front of his wrist, and then proceeded downward at a totally different angle into his left thigh, and not seen or heard or found by the surgeons working on John Connally, but falling in some fortuitous fashion, out, working his way out of the soft tissue, falling from his leg onto the stretcher, to be found by Daryl Tomlinson, the maintenance man, as I told you, at the ER of the hospital. So that is the single bullet theory. One wound producing 7, one bullet producing 7 wounds in 2 men. In Connally's back, out Connally's neck, into Connally's back, through Connally's chest, out the front of his chest, into the back of Connally's wrist, out the front of Connally's wrist, into Connally's left thigh. That's the single bullet theory. You like that? This magic bullet, and by the way, this ammunition is copper jacketed lead core, 1 1/4 inch in length, 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And this bullet, in its pristine state, weighed 161 grains. The bullet that was found beneath the stretcher weighed 158.6 grains, a loss of 2.4 grains, exactly 1.5%. That's impossible because fragments of the bullet were found in 4 anatomic locations of Kennedy and Conley. I spoke with the head operating nurse there, Audrey Bell, and she told me about pieces of bullet, small but discernible, and physically transferable, which she gave to the FBI. That's the weight of the bullet. The trajectory I've already described, and then the condition of the bullet. This bullet allegedly breaking the right fifth rib, destroying 4 inches of the bone of Conley, shattering the distal end of the radius, and the radius broadens. When it comes down from the elbow to the wrist, it broadens. It's a very dense bone. Conley, 6'4", big, heavy-boned guy, not a delicate young woman like you have there in your audience. So that's the single bullet theory, a bullet that has only a slight defect at the base. The rest of the bullet, the copper jacket, is completely intact, no deformity of any kind, a weight loss of only 1.5%, having left pieces of itself in 4 anatomic locations, and a bullet fired in a time sequence that was impossible. And that's where things stand to this day. The government refuses to back off. They have released some information. They have not released, there's still thousands and thousands of pages yet to be released. The Records and Review Board, established in 1994, headed up by a U.S. Attorney, John Tunheim, who is now a federal judge, tried to put everything together and called for the release of all documents and records. And yet to this day, they remain, much of that, sequestered. It was supposed to have been released after a certain amount of time, and they failed to do so. Trump was going to do it on a Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning, he changed his mind. Then Biden was supposed to do it last year. He released some stuff, but not all. And now we'll see what happens in the next 2 weeks when they're supposed to release these documents, the next 2-3 weeks, whether or not it's released. So that is the single bullet theory, and that is the assassination of President Kennedy. And on the head wound, whom do you believe? These 2 comedians who had never done a gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers, or these experienced surgeons in Dallas who had treated gunshot wounds countless times at that very hospital? Whom do you believe? It's really an amazing situation. In 1975, the United States Congress besieged with outcries of disbelief regarding the assassination of Kennedy and the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King, established the Assassination Records and Review Board. It was headed up by congressmen, Republicans, and Democrats who reviewed everything. I was a member of the forensic pathology panel of that board. They had different panels: acoustics, pathology, criminalistics, radiology. They had all these different panels, and we studied everything. I testified before that congressional committee and explained what I have been talking to you about: the absurdity, the impossibility of the so-called single bullet theory. And Congress concluded, that congressional committee concluded, with a high degree of probability that there had been 2 shots. The acoustics evidence was key. The policeman riding off the presidential limousine's left rear tire had inadvertently left his motorcycle buttoned in the transmission mode rather than the receiving mode. It was to be in a receiving mode to receive information and orders from headquarters. Instead, it transmitted message. That acoustics evidence was examined by the foremost expert people in the country, Holt, Baranik, and Newman in Boston, and by two other top guys, Weiss and Ashkenazi and Queens College in New York. And they both concluded that the acoustics evidence was, as I've told you, depicting these shots. And it was based upon that evidence that the Congressional Committee concluded with a high degree of probability that there were two shooters, one from the front and one from the rear. And I believe these two shooters shot simultaneously, the two shots hitting Kennedy in the head simultaneously and blowing out portions of cerebellum in the rear of the skull, despite what Humes and Boswell said, that they said that the cerebellum was intact. So who do you believe? Kem Clark, the chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery, who had operated on hundreds, if not thousands, of brains in his career, and the other doctors and nurses who were there? Or do you believe these two government-controlled imbeciles? And they were controlled. There were 33 people in the autopsy room that night, 33, including four-star admirals and generals who were running the show. When one of the autopsy people wanted to do some further dissection of the wound in the back, they were told not to do that, not to bother, and just continue on. So that, my friends, is the saga of the Warren Commission report. For those of you who are strongly interested in this, I recommend that you get this book that I've written, the JFK Autopsy Dissected, which Ms. Nadelson will show. There it is. Zero in on that. And I understand you have a book there which are going to be raffled off, or somebody gets a prize, whatever. Get that book. It's published by McFarland Publishing Company. It's available in bookstores or directly from McFarland. And you'll learn everything that you want to about the JFK assassination. This is a disgrace, an embarrassment to our country. Why is it being covered up? Well, the government tells you that it's being covered up because to release it would compromise national security. National security? Lee Harvey Oswald, according to them, a sole person. Nobody had any input at all in the planning and the execution and the cover up. And mind you, there are no ands, ifs, buts, maybes, hollevers, or moreovers, neverthelesses in this. You believe the Warren Commission report. You believe that Oswald did all of this by himself. Oswald had been a quite average shooter in the United States Marines. Was nowhere near being a marksman. Oswald, who had gotten a dishonorable discharge from the Marines, claiming that his mother was ill and needed him. His mother had bumped her nose at work and missed one day work. Oswald nevertheless got this honorable discharge, which is pretty tough to get. I can tell you, I was a captain in the United States Air Force. I tried to help some people get out once in a while. Very, very tough to do. He came home, and in no time at all, he turned around, went back, and went to Russia. He stayed in Russia for almost 2.5 years. He sought membership in the Communist Party. The Russians weren't stupid. They denied him that. He married a young woman, Marina Oswald, a lovely young woman. I've met and talked with her at length and corresponded with her over the years. She was the niece of a KGB colonel, high-ranking official, and yet when Oswald returned to the United States, they never saw fit to extensively interrogate him. when I went to Russia in 1974 with a couple of colleagues to meet with our forensic pathology colleagues in Russia. I was there for 4 or 5 days, and we came back, and within half a day, FBI agents were in my office. They wanted to know whom I had seen, whom I had talked to, what did I think, and so on and so forth. But they weren't interested in Lee Harvey Oswald. So that's the Oswald story. There was a second shooter from the front who fired simultaneously. I personally don't believe that Oswald was a shooter at all. There's a lot to get into on that. I don't know that we have time, but Oswald, I believe, was not a shooter. However, I'm not hung up on that. Even if Oswald is the shooter, the problem remains the second shooter. And once you have a second person involved in any crime, that's a conspiracy. In America, in the 50 jurisdictions and under federal law, 2 or more people involved in a planning, execution, or cover-up of something makes it a conspiracy. And that's why the government, in my opinion, is not willing to release this stuff because it's so damaging. Why was Kennedy assassinated? Kennedy was extremely at odds in a hostile fashion with the CIA and military people, extremely hostile. They were disrespectful to him in his office, and out of his office, they were insulting him and criticizing him openly. And it makes what's going on now with Biden, or if you're a Trumper, what's going on with Trumper look like child's play. But it was extremely hostile. And Kennedy was so angry with the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He tore up a piece of paper that he had and threw it into the air in the presence of a U.S. Senator and said, "This is what I intend to do to the CIA. This is what I intend to do to the CIA." And he fired Alan Dulles, who was the director of the CIA. And you ready for this? Who gets appointed to the committee to review everything, and who really runs the show? Alan Dulles. Chief Justice Earl Warren, the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission, the Chief Justice is busy as hell. 2 U.S. senators, and 2 congressmen, the Republicans and Democrats, and 2 others. They're very busy. And so Alan Dulles, who had been fired by Kennedy for what he did with the CIA, now is running the show with the Warren Commission. And that is the Warren Commission. So that's the story, my friends. I'll stop here. And Ms. Nadelson, I'm going to leave it to you to be the moderator, or you have somebody else, or Susie, whoever's going to be. And I'm happy to stay with you now and answer any questions that you have for the next several minutes. Take your time. Anybody has any questions, don't hesitate, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You've already given us so much to think about. If we have questions, if you could put them in the chat to start, but I do have a question just to get us started.
Yeah.
I think once I heard or read that Jackie Kennedy had some kind of connection to Earl Warren, and she lobbied for him to be in charge of the commission. Is that correct?
That I don't know. I know there was a friendly relationship between Chief Justice Warren and the president, but I don't think that Jackie Kennedy, her emotional state, I doubt that, really she was just really out of it, understandably. And for her to have sat down and thought about who, no. I never heard that before. No, I don't believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you. We can also get started on the book raffle while people are coming up with questions. So all we need from you, Dr. Wecht, is for you to give us a number between 1 and 45.
Between 1 and 45.
Yes.
All right, we'll take my age, 39.
Excellent. All right. Chris will let us know, our executive director, who the number 39 belongs to. And that will be the lucky winner of the book. Oh, Shelley Haberman. Can we spotlight Shelley?
It doesn't look like he's at his computer.
Pardon me?
It doesn't
Wow.
look like he is at his computer, so, but he is on. Maybe he stepped away.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that counts. So we will
Yep.
make sure, we'll make sure that he gets his copy.
Yep.
All right. And
Zoe Haberman, is that the name?
Shelley.
What's
For Sheldon Haberman.
Sheldon, oh, Shelley.
Yeah.
Shelley Haberman, Shelley.
Oh, okay. So we do have our first question in the chat. Why do you believe Lee Harvey Oswald was killed?
Oswald was killed because everything that I've discussed with you through top experts in all the fields called in, no question in my mind that no way he would have been convicted. No way. Oswald could not go to trial. And so enter Jack Ruby, Jacob Rubenstein, 17 years of age, was already hooked up with the mafia in Chicago, a little Yiddish boy. And then he moved on there to Dallas some years later. He was at one and the same time. He was a pimp. He was a restaurateur. He was a bar owner. He was a police informant. He was an FBI informant. Damon Runyon on LSD could not have created a character like Jack Rubenstein. And Jack Rubenstein was there in prison. He was visited by Chief Justice Earl Warren and a couple of members of the Warren Commission staff. He got down on bended knees, begged them to take him back to Washington to allow him to testify there. And amazingly, they refused. They refused.
Thank you. We have another question that came in. Which groups do you believe organized the assassination?
Top CIA and military leaders, either active or recently retired. No question, they are the people, because there was no way they could deal with Kennedy. You couldn't defeat the Kennedys at the polls. Forget about it. There's nothing. They tried every which way. They tried to embarrass him with sexual accounts and so on. Nothing counted. There was only one way, and that was to eliminate him.
Does anyone have any other questions about JFK, or what about any of your other cases?
Yeah, if somebody has a question about one of my other cases, go ahead. RFK, Martin Luther King, Elvis Presley, John Benet Ramsey, Phil Spector, Chandra Levy, Waco Branch Davidian fire.
Of all, may I ask you, of all those cases that you mentioned, is there one where you wish the general public knew something or understood something that they didn't know or understand?
Yeah, the Robert F. Kennedy case. Well, let me ask you, folks, and Ms. Nadelson, you handled it there. People who are old enough to remember, Robert Kennedy, a U.S. senator in New York, planning to run for, is running for president, has just won the presidential race on the Democratic ticket in California, which is tantamount to him getting the nomination. He's at the Ambassador Hotel there in LA. They know that they can't get him out through that adoring crowd. It'll take forever. They say, come on, we'll go out through the back kitchen area. So they walk him out through the back kitchen area. Sirhan, a Palestinian immigrant, is there in front of him and shoots as Kennedy's walking toward him. Tell me, and just yell out, what was the distance? Give me approximate distance from Sirhan's gun to Robert Kennedy as Kennedy walked toward him. What was the approximate distance? Do you recall? Anybody? Yell.
Close. They were close together, weren't they?
Well, there's Kennedy walking down. Never that close. I don't know what you mean by close. No more than a couple of few feet away. Well, the distance from which the fatal shot was fired that killed Robert Kennedy was 1 to 1.5 inches. 1 to 1.5 inches. And that shot was fired with a slightly forward direction. So that's the story of Robert Kennedy. And the public doesn't know it because it was never introduced at trial of Sirhan. His defense attorney never asked Tom Noguchi, my good friend and colleague, who was a medical examiner in LA, who did the autopsy, about that. What was the distance from which the fatal shot was fired? He would never ask that question. 1 to 1.5 inches. Okay. How about Marilyn Monroe? There's a puzzling case. Accident, suicide, homicide. Could have been any of those three. Could have been any of those three. I lean toward suicide. She was being cut off by the Kennedys, with whom she had had sexual relationships, both of them not simultaneously. This was not a menage a trois, but she had had sex with Robert Kennedy, and she had sex with John Kennedy. There's a movie out now, and they even show Marilyn Monroe, I think, having oral sex with Kennedy. So that's the story there. We'll never really know for sure. Specimens that Dr. Noguchi had collected from the stomach and the intestines to see whether all of the drugs that killed her, barbiturates and chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative, had been taken at the same time or taken intermittently, she losing conscious awareness of what she had taken. That happens with people sometimes on those drugs, and then taking more and more and more. That would be an accidental death. Could she have been murdered by somebody? I don't think so. No basis for that. But I think she had been told that her relationship with John Kennedy had to come to an end, that it would be an embarrassment for the re-election in '64, and I leaned strongly toward suicide. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have some questions coming in about JonBenet Ramsey and Martin Luther King.
All right, JonBenet Ramsey. I'm not here to sell books, but I recommend strongly that you get my book, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey? That book will answer everything for you on that case, including a judge's opinion, including the autopsy report. JonBenet Ramsey, this 6-year-old beautiful little girl. Her parents had taken her and her brother Burke, 9 years old, on family visits to friends on Christmas Day. They came back, and according to her parents, she was immediately placed in bed and went to sleep. The next morning, the mother, upon awakening and making breakfast for her family, found a piece of paper, a note leaning against a back stairs, and it was a ransom note. It said, we represent a small foreign faction. And they demanded, what would you demand what would you demand if you were kidnapping a little girl whose father is a multimillionaire? $1 million, $500,000, $250,000? The demand was for $118,000. You like that number, 118,000, which was exactly the amount of money that John Ramsey, the father, had obtained from his company as a bonus the year before. Exactly. How many people knew about John Ramsey's bonus? And then the autopsy, which was not done after some a long delay, revealed chronic inflammation of the vaginal lining, focal erosion of the vaginal lining at the 7 o'clock position, some birefringent material seen under polarized light, all of which strongly suggest penile penetration. I don't think the little girl was raped, but I think it was penile penetration, which I think the father was engaged in. Patsy Ramsey, West Virginia contestant, the Miss America contest, was out of the sex business. She had stage 4 ovarian cancer, and she had had surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. She was not in the sex business. And I think for this perverted father, the little girl was a surrogate, penile penetration. And that's what I think that's all about. A rope around the neck to give vicarious eroticism to the father, not to the little girl. When you place a rope around somebody's neck, it produces pressure on the vagus nerve. There's the right and the left vagus nerves. They come from the brain. They're the 10th nerves of the 12 cranial nerves. They come down inside the neck to the chest and send fibers to the heart and lungs, which they control along with other organs in the body. And when pressure is applied inadvertently, and it doesn't require a lot of pressure, then it can produce a vagal reflex. A vagal reflex can cause the heart to beat slowly, and then when the heart beats slowly, the lungs don't get the proper oxygenation, and the brain doesn't get the proper oxygenation, and you have a vicious cycle leading to cardiorespiratory bradycardia and diminished oxygenation, and you soon will have a death. And that's what I think was the basis upon which John Benet Ramsey was killed. Not intentionally, but it's still homicide by her perverted father.
And we had a question about Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King, interesting case. Martin Luther King had gone to Memphis to try to help solve a refuse workers strike in Memphis. And he was on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel where he was staying, and shots were fired, and he was killed. So we're asked to believe that James Earl Ray, a punk hoodlum, did this all by himself. James Earl Ray had spent most of his adult life in jail for various crimes, but never anything of a something like murder or so on. That he tried to escape from jail many times and was unsuccessful. One time the car ran out of gas. Another time the car had a flat tire. He this time escaped successfully. He's in Mexico for a year, and one day James Earl Ray says, "I can't live a day longer unless Martin Luther King is eliminated." He makes his way back from Mexico. He knows that if he gets a room in a boarding house and goes down to the end of the hall, opens up a transom window, he will be looking at the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, and he will know, and he will see King, and he shoots and fires. He kills King, and then he runs down and he says, "You know what? Who in the world is ever going to think of me, James Earl Ray, as having been the assailant of Martin Luther King?" He takes the rifle with his fingerprints and he drops the rifle and leaves it there. Don't take the rifle, throw it into a river, into the forest, break it down, destroy it. He leaves the rifle with his fingerprints, makes his way to Canada. By the time they trace him, he then goes to England, and finally on his way back from England, he's arrested. And then James Earl Ray is ready to stand trial, and he conveniently develops cancer, and that's the end of James Earl Ray. So that's the Martin Luther King story.
Thank you. We have a question, if you still have time,
All
about,
right, good. One more question, yeah, please.
okay, about Jeffrey Epstein. Did he commit suicide?
No, Jeffrey Epstein was murdered. He had a fracture of the hyoid bone, a delicate U-shaped bone high up under the mandible with the base faced anteriorly, and then fractures on both sides of the Adam's apple, the thyroid cartilage. You do not get that from a lean-in hanging, and that's was a lean-in. He wasn't suspended. You don't get that kind of force. Jeffrey Epstein was murdered. There's no way he was going to go into court and talk about all of his relationships that he had developed with his little 13, 14, 15-year-old girls involving a senator here, a governor there, a presidential candidate. No way in the world. And that was the remarkable story of that case. Incredible. Well, I want to thank everybody. Warm regards to all the Balk family. Roz, if you're there, my dear love, stay well. And good wishes to all the members of your wonderful congregation. I've been there many times. And even though you tried to escape the Jewish residences in Squirrel Hill, I still welcome all of you as Jews. You can't escape any further than being out there. All right, take care. Thank you very much for your attention. Ms. Nadelson, thank you. You were wonderful. And Susie, for your introduction. Tell the rabbi I said regards. And I'll give you one joke you can pass on to the rabbi. Morris Goldberg dies. He was a miserable, cantankerous SOB. Everybody hated his guts. And so he's there, and the rabbi is conducting the service. So he wants somebody to say something. So he says somebody has something to say about Morris Ginsburg, and silence. And he keeps imploring, beseeching, begging, essentially, almost on bended knee for someone to say something. Finally, back of the room, guy sticks up his hand. And he says, yes, Hyman, yes, what do you got to say? He said, his brother was verse. So that's the problems that confront the rabbi. Okay, take care. Best wishes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cyril.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Love you. Bye.
Thank you. And we will see our First Monday's audience back on December 5th for the rise and fall of Jewish gangsters. I don't kill on Shabbos.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That will be presented by our local author, Abby Mendelson, and we will be going back to a hybrid with lunch. So stay tuned for more details, December 5th, a lunch and also Zoom program. Thank you all so much.